Hello, everybody. Welcome back to You Can't Win, episode 6. Today, we are going to talk about unemployment, underemployment, UBI, and the future of work.
What is it you want to do when you grow up?
All right. Tom here with Donald, as usual.
Hello.
How you doing, Donald?
I'm doing pretty good. Had a good week. How about you?
Doing pretty good as well. Yeah. Excited to keep going forward with the podcast.
Sure.
So let's open up just talking a little bit about our own experiences with the job market and sort of what our careers have kind of looked like, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I talked a little bit about it on maybe the first one, and yeah, I have always had a problem kind of like holding down work for any length of time, and I've become very, very, I guess, self-destructive in that kind of situation where I feel like, I just kind of end up kind of quitting or something like that, pretty quickly, and even in school and things like that, kind of related things, I've kind of had problems with that. But I think I've turned a corner on that in some ways, but it's still kind of like I find the kind of like work environment really controlling and really difficult to navigate and stuff. And I think that at the same time, though, I've always, at least for a lot of my life, I felt like I had a resume where, in theory, I could get a job if I was healthy, and I could, you know what I mean? Like I had like an economics degree, and I felt like if I had to work somewhere in like an emergency or something like that kind of thing, like I felt like I might be able to get, an okay job. So it's kind of a weird kind of thing where I felt like I was unemployed or underemployed most of my life, but then also I felt like I could theoretically be qualified to do a pretty good job, and kind of never really had that same kind of fear of unemployment, of just not being able to get anything kind of thing. It was kind of the opposite in that way kind of thing. So it was very confusing that way.
Yeah, like on paper, you felt like you had
Yeah.
credentials that kind of,
Yeah.
that would look fine, but then just the experience of work was not working for you.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, no one likes working, really. I mean, some people get lucky and they find something that they enjoy, or maybe the work is just okay, it's whatever, and they find people they can work with that they like working with, and that makes it enjoyable. But I mean, we're talking about like panic attacks and stuff like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So have you had similar kind of things around work at all, like about in terms of like anxieties and stuff, or has it been more just kind of avoiding certain types of work, like kind of typical kind of office jobs or something like that kind of thing? So
When I was younger, definitely I had I actually did have panic attacks like before work and at work sometimes, and so I feel like I can kind of relate to your situation a bit, even though I don't think it was quite as severe. It just, those are things that you can't help. Like, it just hits you sometimes, and you can't really just like, troop your way through it. It's really debilitating.
Yeah.
So, and it's not 100% that. I'm also a fairly lazy person.
Yeah.
And I definitely like to try to find easy ways out of things. So that combination just had my 20s were. I wasn't exactly like tearing things up in my the job part of my life, but I think I've gotten over a lot of anxieties and stuff like that, not just with work in general. A lot of that's kind of in my past now, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, I found a situation that works for me. It's not a typical work thing, but I guess maybe it is more typical nowadays. It's kind of like a gig economy type thing.
Sure.
Like freelancing, and I like the fact that I don't have a boss over me. I think that was a really big problem. Like that just doesn't work for me when, I don't know, I'm just not good with a boss.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
So just having that out of the equation makes things a lot easier, and I can kind of pick and choose my clients, and I can set my schedule to some extent the way I like it. And
Yeah.
maybe it's not even the actual flexibility that it provides, but just the sort of feeling of having that control and it not being like completely out of my hands
Yeah.
makes
No,
it a
I
little.
think yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that's actually helped a lot in some ways in the last few years is kind of realizing that a lot of people have the same kind of attitude or problem or kind of thing around that kind of like with bosses and work and kind of stuff where um, it seems more rational. Like, I mean, for a few years, I just thought like I was spinning out and I was comparing myself against people that I knew that had, great jobs on paper and stuff. And I kind of thought, well, I have to kind of force myself into that mold to be able to do anything kind of thing. And I think that's not a healthy impulse all the time kind of thing, to feel like you have to conform or also just completely fail or something like that. Like there's lots of different
Mhm.
ways that you can kind of do what you want to do or something. And I mean, I still haven't figured it out completely. I've gotten, obviously, but it feels good to kind of relax a bit around that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. What kind of jobs have you done? Have you ever done like real kind of grunt, like manual labor type stuff, like factory work or anything like that?
So I did, I mean, again, those are usually the ones where like I had once I worked at it was kind of funny. It was only for like a few weeks or something like that, but I did work at like a, coffee and tea factory and,
Mm.
where it's like all like, I don't know, you like mixing all the giant, things and, a lot of like packing, like picking and packing and all that kind of stuff and all the different things. It was kind of funny because I was so bad at it, like so bad at everything that I was paid $7 an hour, and they they tried to find things for me to do that would like actually fit their kind of like needs and kind of like I would be able to kind of handle. And I was so bad at all of it because a lot of it is kind of like dealing with like it's all sped up, right? It's all like the conveyor belts are moving too fast and everything and all the or it's kind of like there's something wrong with it in some other way that you're gonna have to like get down to a science. Like when we were mixing the sugar and stuff, like it would just cover me, just coating me like my whole body with like just sugar, and and it was like I don't know. So it was kind of like a comical in retrospect, but at the time I was so depressed about it. I was just so upset that it was like terrible work. I don't know. And I've done like I've done over the years like where people will be like, okay, we'll pay you to, clear out this basement or something. You know what I mean? Kind of like just like things where it was just mindless kind of like physical work. But no, I've never really done that as like a thing for like, months at a time or something like that. Yeah. But it was good experience to have that like little bit, just to actually,
Right.
I don't know. And then, no, most of my jobs have been like I worked at like a bank teaching like online banking to people that came in, and I worked at like a community development agency, and I guess more recently I did like that teaching assistant stuff at school, and I don't know, and now writing I guess a bit, but just stuff like that. Like kind of a lot of it was just kind of office generic kind of work kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. So how about you?
Yeah, I've worked like kind of. I did a lot of random crappy jobs when I was younger. I dropped out of college my first run through. I don't know if we've talked about that yet.
A little bit, yeah, we did, but yeah,
But yeah, I worked in a engine refurbishing plant for a while, and that was one that I it was so tiring that I like didn't have time to be anxious about all the work related stress and all that kind of stuff. Like it just really wore me out.
yeah.
But that was one that I had the most panic attacks
Oh, really?
before and after. And I think maybe that's related to because like I couldn't process what was going on. It just sort of hit me at certain points during the day, and in the form of a panic attack. I don't know. Maybe that's not
Yeah,
how that works. I have no
I
idea.
don't know.
But
Yeah,
that seemed to be the case. Um, what else did I do? I was like a nighttime janitor at a grocery store.
yeah,
Uh, I did all kinds of random stuff. I did day labor where I would like be packing trucks in a refrigerated room.
yeah,
Um, all this kind of stuff. And then once I went back to college, I was able to swing a research assistant position with one of the professors that took a liking to me,
Mm-hmm.
and that was interesting. And it was also like the first job outside of like some kind of like weird internships that I did when I was really young overseas at the embassies, that was like not just like a complete crappy like grunt job. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh man, this is, I got it made. Like you get paid to
Yeah. Yeah.
photocopy stuff all day. Like I'll take this.
Yeah.
And then pretty much I've been doing this freelance like education thing out since I've been out of college, and really it works for me. I like teaching people stuff, and I like the kind of situation that I'm in with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's hard to say like how much of it is the nature of the work and how much of it was me just growing as a person and being able to like handle those kind of situations now. But
That was actually something that actually kind of really depressed me when I was living in Montreal, kind of like trying to doing like going, I don't know, like going to like work at like going to like we had like groups where we would talk about what we wanted to do if we like got healthier about work and stuff and ideas that we had, and that was actually really helpful afterwards. Like at the time it was kind of depressing because it's just, I mean, obviously, you know, you're not, it's not like a conducive to feeling great about yourself being at the hospital and stuff and just talking about these kind of things all the time and not actually being able to do much.
yeah,
But the thing that was kind of like depressing about it too is that those are like the menial kind of jobs you're talking about, like the night janitor and stuff like that. Those are the kind of jobs that they want you to think about more because they're like, well, these are the ones that can work with, you know, severe mental illness and stuff. They're like, these are the kind of things you'd probably be able to do for a bit, and that just kind of, it made me so upset because it was just kind of like, I don't know. It just seemed like that would be a way of just doing that for the rest of my life and not being engaged in the kind of things I'm interested in, and just, I don't know. And but it's funny because they're probably not wrong. You know what I mean? Like it's like it's if they see, you know, 100 people, 99 people, that might be a better fit for them than, you know, they get a bit of money that way and they can kind of start building a bit of independence and stuff, which is so important for that situation. So it's kind of like, but yeah, I don't know. I've always felt like that, and that I, you know, that I'm that kind of person on the outlier or that can't really fit into the system in that way. So yeah, yeah,
yeah, I can relate to that feeling too. But then I also think that's like a very common feeling as well. So
yeah,
it's hard to know
sure,
how much of that is based in like an objective assessment of your own situation, and how much of
yeah,
that is just like, well, I'm special because I'm me. You know, I'm.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. And not only that, but I mean, it's one thing that I had to learn. That's kind of the opposite of that in a lot of ways. Is that um, uh, you can't judge by what people are doing now, what they're kind of interested in, and what they're going to be interested in the future and stuff. Because there's so much that people kind of have to just deal with in their lives that like they don't. You know, it's not like someone might be feel like they're in a rut or something, but they, you know, they might kind of have different ideas or interests and stuff like that. They're just completely, I don't know. That's been kind of something surprising about like online stuff, and that is that there's people that I feel like if I had just met them on the street or something like that, I probably would have no concept of the fact that they're interested in the same kind of things that I am or something like that, or not even interested,
Right.
but kind of like we could talk about things, and I'd be
Yeah.
like, oh yeah. I think that's one thing that's kind of like a. I feel like sometimes though that's the problem is that people do go in the opposite direction of that online, where they kind of go, well, I can never talk to anyone that I know in real life because they're just completely different from me or something like that. I don't
Because
know.
they're not
For me,
furries or something.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's part of it. I mean, I do think people, um, they kind of convince themselves that they're part of like a small online clique or something like that. And I don't know. If anything, it's made me a lot better at. I feel like, I mean, than I was. Maybe not great, but like a lot better than I was relating to people on an everyday basis, like just chatting with random people a bit and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's been a little bit of both of that for me. I think it kind of confirms for me that a lot of people are just not worth talking to.
Okay, yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
okay, I get what you're about, and there's nothing else going on there that I'm, you know, I mean, that's a,
yeah,
that's probably not fair to say, but in terms of like what I'm realistically gonna get out of engaging with a person,
yeah.
it is exactly what my like first impression is, I think in most
Sure.
cases. But
Okay.
then the other side of that is that yeah, there's a lot of people who you would sort of write off because they have this kind of job or they're from this kind of background or whatever, or you would just assume that they don't want to engage with you. I think
Yeah. Yeah,
actually
that's a big thing. Yeah.
that's been something that I've really experienced with Muslims online is that I kind of felt like okay, well, all the kind of jokes that I make and the kind of crazy things that I like think about and say and all this kind of stuff, like it's not really something I should be saying around Muslims because they're a little more conservative and more uh, quote unquote traditional and whatnot. But at least with the people that I've met on Twitter, it's been surprisingly like far more open and whatnot than I had
Yeah.
expected. And in my real life interactions with a lot of Muslims, a lot of them around me don't even really speak English that much, and they don't really seem eager to interact with me too much beyond just like pleasantries and whatnot. So we don't really get into those kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just, I don't know. It's cool to just see that people are actually people are people in the same way that I think of myself as a person. Like I'm
Sure.
not such a weirdo.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, I think, and that's kind of a good point too, in that I think religion does change in some ways that kind of, um, attitude in some ways, because it does make you a bit more, I guess, like, I don't know the word, but like democratic or something like that, where you kind of, I don't know, I think when there's, it's like in secular society or something like that, there is that tendency to kind of write off people too much, and then feel like you don't have some, spirit of brotherhood or something with them,
Yeah.
at least some kind of residual level. Like it makes it very easier, yeah, to just kind of say, oh, get rid of them or something, instead of kind of be like, well, hopefully something good will happen to them or something, kind of thing, so.
Yeah, I think there's you have to have some kind of sense of humanity, and in religious kind of perspectives, that's a really fully formed uh, concept that kind of encompasses like your whole experience as a human being. Like you don't just see people in terms of, oh, we're in this class, so I can relate to these people, but those other people in that class are like so different,
Yeah.
or people from this ethnicity or this background, I can't relate to them if they're from this other one, or whatever it is. Um,
Sure.
I think that it's pretty difficult to get at an idea of humanity that's universal from a secular point of view that isn't flat or
Yeah.
or or
it,
really narrow in some way.
it ends up kind of being imported into that kind of quest idea we were talking about sometimes, where it's an idea of humanity, but it's kind of like it has to be reconciled in the future, because right now we're so divided in lots of ways, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know.
true. Yeah, you kind of have this like postponing of like at some moment in the future we will all be human together, but right now it's just this group or the people that think this way.
Yeah.
And that definitely happens with religious groupings as well, you
Sure.
know.
Yeah.
But I think there's more potential for a actual kind of humanism to be
Yeah.
a little bit ironic about it from
No.
a
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
from a religious point of view.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, so work kind of sucks, but it's not that bad, I guess. You find I feel like you figure out something that works for you in the end somehow.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about UBI. So this is going to go up a little bit later than we're recording it a little bit in advance. But right now, all over Twitter, I'm seeing Yanggang 2020, neat bucks, all that kind of thing.
Neat
So
bug. I didn't hear that one before. Neat
yeah,
bucks. That's
yeah,
pretty funny. Yeah,
right. So Andrew Yang is the U.S. presidential candidate that's got the one of his big things on his platform is UBI, which is $1,000 a month just for being an American citizen, and that is supposed to mitigate a lot of the job losses that are going to be coming with AI and job automation and stuff like that. It's supposed to help spur the economy and help out marginalized communities and promote like business and stuff like that in those communities. And he's got other ideas as well that we can get into if we want to
yeah,
go there. But let's just discuss the thing about UBI because I really don't know a lot about the economic issues
yeah.
related to it. And I think you have some personal experience with it and also some understanding of what those issues might be.
Sure. Yeah. So do you have like specific things you wanted to get into, like what questions or?
Okay, well,
Yeah.
yeah, I have some things here. So a lot of people when they hear the idea of UBI, they immediately wonder of if inflation is going to be a problem because you're just giving people free money, and
Yeah.
isn't that going to cause inflation? So,
Yeah. I guess the first thing is that the money's going to come from somewhere, basically, right? It's got to. I'm not sure what his exact plan is for, but I mean, he's going to have to, theoretically at least, he's going to have to tax it from somewhere or cut spending elsewhere. So I don't know. Number one, like, does this affect Social Security at all or anything like that, or like, you
I
know what I mean?
think
Like,
I think his this where he's going to source this money is from a VAT, a value-added tax,
okay,
which I
okay,
also don't know anything about that.
yeah,
So if you have any ideas about that, that'd be great. He
yeah.
says that European countries generally have a value-added tax, and that the United States does not, and
Yeah.
that we should have it, and that's where the money for UBI will come from.
Okay, so that's just basically sales tax. Like, so it's just so and it's the difference is that it's added at each stage of production so that like manufactured goods and things like that you only pay the sales tax on the final price instead of everything in between the chain of production. So anyways, the main thing is that because the money's coming from somewhere else, they're taking purchasing power away from other people to give it to the other people, kind of thing, right? So like the money
Okay.
is being transferred from one person to another, and it's distributed because I mean the VAT. I'm pretty sure he would probably only have it at like I don't know, like 5%, 7%, 10% or something. So um, it's not like So some people will see a reduction in their purchasing power, and then other people see the increase. So there's not really that same kind of pressure on prices because there's not that kind of. It's not like the money just kind of automatically just kind of instantly appears in the economy. It comes from
Right.
somewhere else. So it's kind of like, yeah, I think that's one thing. Uh, and it is true that maybe there might be changes. Like people kind of worry about like landlords and stuff. The one thing that's actually probably the most true around this is that so in like kind of mainstream economic theory, wages are set by kind of like what the company sees your contribution to productivity, and not really much else. Like we kind of think of wages as being like, well, that's a poor area, so people don't get paid as much, or we think of that kind of stuff. But for mainstream kind of economics, it's more about what you kind of contribute to the final product. And obviously, that's kind of like it doesn't make sense in a lot of areas where, like police or something like that. Police are not, you can't pay a police officer in terms of like their contribution to ending crime or something. Really, you have to just give them a salary. But it's important for this kind of stuff because um, it's a way of if you're being paid according to productivity and things like that, then I don't know. There's this theory that basically what's going to end up happening is that low wage workers would get paid less overtime or something like that. Like they would, it would be a way. Like say if you're working at Walmart now and you get like this $1,000 a month check from the government, um, the argument is that it would put pressure on Walmart to reduce their wages so that you could basically subsidize Walmart by getting this UBI or something like that. So that's one of the concerns people have too, is that it ends up kind of subsidizing low wages and kind of traps people into this kind of dependency, really, instead of actually getting them to be able to earn their whole income or something. So yeah.
I see. So you like if you want to push it to the extreme, and you would have no wages being paid out by a company, and it would just be paid out through UBI payments. That's like the extreme case, and I can kind of see how that ends up just being the government pays your wages instead of the companies that are employing you.
Yeah, and one of the ways that that kind of ends up kind of like I guess they call it like the moral hazards involved. So one of the problems with that people kind of this is that so I assume in his plan that there's no actual work requirements or something like that. Like there's no requirement that you actually have to do any specific tasks.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just a policy choice. So I mean, the government could all like one. I mean, in some ways, they could almost always end up being like, well, okay, you have UBI, but you have to check in with your worker once a week and go to volunteer and all that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, that's not part of the policy as it is stated, but it kind of brings up like an important kind of point to me, at least, is that there's so many things wrong with the existing welfare system.
Mm-hmm.
I know that they kind of want to shift it over to. That's one of the reasons why they kind of promote this kind of thing, is to kind of like change everything at once. But the current system is already so filled with so much paperwork and kind of like terrible things you kind of have to deal with, and kind of clawbacks and limits on what you get for this and that, and especially in a lot of places in the U.S., like there's pretty much like you basically have, even if you're on welfare, you basically have to work anyways, because you have to work for or like go for different kind of appointments and do all this other kind of stuff.
Right.
So I don't know. I just have this kind of gut feeling about this kind of stuff where it's like, well, if people are okay with the system as it is now, why would they be better with UBI? And at least the marginal people, like the people, not the marginal, but like the kind of people in the middle who may, if democracy matters here, like then I'm not sure it does actually, but like if it does, if it's like say middle upper income people who are deciding what the policies should be for welfare, I feel like there's a lot of things they could have already changed, which UBI is almost like a radical embrace of those changes, and sometimes, you know what I mean? Like it's not like people on welfare right now get $1,000 a month of food stamps or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it's not.
Yeah.
There's so many ways that they could just raise food stamps, but instead, they've been cutting back food stamps and limiting the number of people that can get them, and it seems like a very popular thing amongst Republicans, at least, this concept that there's too many people on food stamps and that they pay for too much different variety of things. Now, to me, seeing UBI is like saying, well, why don't we have food stamps of $1,000 a month, and people can spend it on whatever they want? It's like, right. I don't know. I just don't know. Like, if the problem is to solve that people don't have enough money, then there's a lot of ways to solve that. And so I just feel like it's a credibility thing, And the reason why is that just to kind of go on a bit more about this is that it's the reason why is because there's a lot of conservatives that believe that this is a way they can save money, right? They think that they can use the UBI to kind of leverage against other social programs and say, well, we don't need any sort of welfare payments or anything like that because we have the UBI. But that's not actually true, because a lot of what welfare caseworkers do and stuff is like, oh, you don't have a bed, we need to get you some money for a bed or something like that, for like a young mother who's like an immigrant or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it's stuff that we wouldn't think about directly, but a lot of their actual work as caseworkers is solving problems for people and helping them solve their problems that just don't have any money. And so it's just I don't know. There's just stuff like that where it's kind of like, we still need caseworkers, we still need charities. We still need all these kind of institutions. So it's kind of like, well, the quick fix is not gonna, solve that. So yeah. Anyways,
Yeah,
so
the thing about conservatives seeing UBI as a way to cut back social services, I think there's a lot of people on the left who view UBI in the same light, and I'm not sure if that's like a fair assessment or not. I really don't know. Like, it seems like they may sort of just see conservatives seeing it that way, supporting it for those reasons, and then just assuming that it's like that's the idea behind UBI.
yeah,
But the thing with Yang that kind of is interesting to me is that he also is in favor of single payer healthcare. So that's an expansion of social services coupled with UBI. So
yeah.
um, I don't know. That's interesting.
So if you poll economists, like professional PhD like economists, on something like UBI, the vast majority support it. Like the vast majority think it's a good idea in theory, but it's one of those things where there's some people, if you ask them, they probably say like 1,000 a month is still pretty low. Like, you know what I mean? It's kind of it's enough that I mean, if you live in San Francisco on 1,000 a month, you're gonna have a hard time. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of and it's so it becomes one of those things where if that were the only, it's kind of, I mean, in the United States the welfare system is so destroyed since the 90s and before that anything like that would be a huge improvement in some ways, but
Yeah.
it's still like we would still, I mean, the United States would still have a problem with poverty, and it would still have a problem with and you do see that kind of sometimes, that kind of, oh, we'll just solve poverty with this one measure. And so that's been the big fear of, I guess, like the labor movement in Canada is kind of being traditionally very critical of these kind of programs because they would much rather, protect jobs and protect the welfare system as assuming, like, sort of like trying to create a social model where the assumption is the average person will have a good job that can pay their bills, and then some people will need help. And, and then the difference for UBI, there is this kind of bleeding over, and we can talk a bit about this a bit more, is that there's this idea that it's almost like a supplement to the job that's not going to be there. You know what I mean? Like the job is not going to be as good as it was before, and you're not going to be able to hold down a kind of standard stuff. But really, the labor market is something that we can kind of control in a lot of ways. And if we're going to have this kind of casualized, no pension system, no, all these kind of things, that's a choice. Like we can have that, but we could also have a highly kind of ordered labor market with people, the average person kind of having a role job where they kind of, they're like a teacher or a nurse or something like that. I don't know. That's always been a worry for me too, is that, but to me, because, I have the economics background, I look at it as it's just money. Like it's just, all the basic income is, dollars. So it's not like, I don't know. It kind of, it takes some of the energy out of it either way. Cause it's kind of like, it's not some big horrible thing that's going to change everything for the worse, but at the same time, it's just money. So worrying about what it's called and how it kind of is packaged is more a political problem than it is an actual economic kind of.
Okay, well that's sort of been my like intuitive impression of this thing as like a complete simpleton when it comes to economics and stuff. That's sort of my impression. It's like, okay, well, we can either have things packaged such a way that this is free, this is provided, there's a subsidy here for you for food stamps and that kind of thing, or or it can be provided in a more like liquid cash kind of way, and then you make those decisions for yourself. And either way, it what really matters isn't the form, it's just that you have enough to handle your needs.
Yeah, and I think it's also some of this idea of just what, how do at least if like the politicians are the ones kind of controlling this kind of stuff, then how do they view the economy as a whole and what are its purposes and stuff? Because if it's just a matter of like little reforms here and there, but if there is like a political will to like say, no, everyone should have housing, everyone should have, these kind of like baseline things, and almost like a political embarrassment if they don't have those things,
Hmm.
then the actual form it takes matters a lot less at that point, because it's, you know
Sure.
what I mean. Like if it's
Yeah.
kind of like, if you know, if like a social worker knows they have to get a person a certain set of things, then how that is done matters less. But the thing is, so yeah, I don't know. I kind of I understand the concerns of like making it like a. There are a lot of people, especially in Canada, like with the Green Party. The Green Party is a lot bigger here than it is in the United States. It's still small, but it's still like it is an influential thing, and they're one of their big platforms is always like basic income, and so they push this very hard, and it really has been a conservative force within the part, like the Green Party, to try to. It's like a progressive measure, but it kind of strips away a lot of their thinking about the rest of the economy. I mean, they do think in terms of like say macroeconomic, like we got to change the ecology and stuff like that, but they don't think as much about um, traditional kind of social policy kind of stuff, because they kind of think, well, we got to solve it this way and stuff. It's kind of, it ends up being too kind of wonky, because I don't know. I always worry when any kind of program is designed by economists to solve problems in other fields, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
like there are social workers and they kind of know what needs to be done in some ways, and so uh, yeah, because sometimes the anger becomes so much about the fact that there are bureaucrats there, and not the fact that like, because that's one of the big things in Canada is the conservatives as well. Like any conservative that supports it kind of like focuses on the fact it's gonna like obliterate part of the social welfare bureaucracy and stuff. So yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it it's interesting. I think it would be fine if we had it. I don't think the idea with, at least from coming from Yang, is that this just replaces social services. Like I said, he wants to have single payer healthcare.
Yeah.
Um, but he's also he used to be a venture capitalist, I think. So he definitely has this idea of like promoting entrepreneurialism and kind of like just capitalist ideals in general. But I mean, he doesn't seem like a bad guy. He wants to decriminalize marijuana federally and release everyone from prisons who's in prisons for those things.
Yeah.
He wants to like downsize military bases abroad and create like a legion of builders or something like that, with so military personnel would be put to work rebuilding infrastructure and stuff. So he has like ideas that do seem morally grounded in a certain idea of like what a social good is that we should have, and
Yeah.
have practical ideas about how to get there. And I think the UBI thing, people tend to read maybe too much into it sometimes. Like they
Yeah.
see it as carrying all this ideological baggage, where maybe it's just something that you can get like working. It's a positive thing for working people just because it's a plus in the, in the government or the state giving back to you.
Yeah.
And it's also something that some demon like Zuckerberg or Elon Musk can actually be happy with as well. So
Yeah.
I kind of see like that as like a decent way of going about things. We could compare that to more of like an old school, like Bernie Sanders kind of approach to things, if we want to. I think a big difference between someone like Yang and someone like Bernie Sanders is, or anyone kind of just promoting like sort of New Deal style, like worker job programs, all that kind of stuff, is an idea about what the economy should be doing in the future, like what we should be building to. I think Yang seems to be trying to embrace automation and AI and all that kind of stuff, and I don't know if that's a something we should be concerned about, or what. Um, but then on the Bernie Sanders style thing, like that seems fine, but it also doesn't seem to be like a real vision for what we're going to be doing like at work. Like I think he just sort of seems to have this idea that we'll just keep doing what we have been doing.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of do buy into the idea that things are changing pretty dramatically, and that we can't just kind of be uh, like this. The U.S. economy is like, how much of it is services? Like 60% or something like that. I just don't think that's really sustainable at this point.
So yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure how to phrase it. Yeah, this idea that automation and AI and all these things, it's hard to know exactly to me like what that means, kind of thing, in a lot of ways, especially because
Sure.
at like a global level, I don't know. Like, I don't know exactly what jobs exactly are going to be replaced and how they're going to. To me, job levels are set more by overall macroeconomic policy. Like that's just kind of mainstream kind of economic thing, and you can't really. It's unlikely that you would have a situation where the economy is kind of well ordered and well functioning and stuff, and you would have mass unemployment at the same time. Like it just doesn't.
Mm.
Um, that's usually like a, um, a symptom of something else. It's not really a symptom of automation. Um, it's more a symptom of some other problem with the labor market. Like in Europe, there's parts of the. I mean, it's more because certain parts of Europe are depressed economically, and then other parts are expanding rapidly. So the overall economic structure can't really adjust to how it should, in theory. So, anyway, the point being is that um, even if there were, like, say, a huge shift in automation in the United States, there would be a change in the labor market that corresponded to it. Um, Now, it might be terrible. It might be like kind of like a Rust Belt kind of thing. But that was
Right.
also like, like it could be that's true, but it's also it's hard to like. I mean, just in kind of like the way that I still think about economics and stuff is that um, yeah, like it's like there's still as many jobs as there was in the United States as there was 30 years ago. It's just that they've shifted, as you said, to because making certain things in certain ways, like making cars or something like that, has become a lot easier in a lot of ways and a lot safer than it was before. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like it's I don't know. Like people thought that when farms technology was changing, that everyone would be unemployed because farms would produce so much that people wouldn't have to actually work on them, so there'd be nothing for them to do, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, it seems to me very clearly that there'd be just a giant shift in how things happen. But yeah, I don't know if it necessarily has to be um, mass unemployment with nothing for people to do, kind of thing, or something like that. Yeah. So
Mm. Okay. So, yeah, we kind of went through all my ideas here.
yeah.
Um, the the last thing I guess that we could talk about is like, well, no, I don't even want to talk about that.
Okay. So do you want me to pitch some questions to us, or
Sure.
you
Yeah,
want to
let's
move on to
let's
that?
just go
Yeah.
on to the questions. Yeah.
Sure. Um, do you think those videos of cats not stepping on the Quran are legit?
Well, I mean, I don't think it means very much, but yeah, they seem like actual videos of cats not stepping on Qurans.
Oh, okay, okay. So it's not some mystical thing, you know?
No, I mean, like, no.
Okay. Well, actually, what's one thing I don't know if you still are interested in that kind of stuff like as much, but what do you think about those kind of miracles of the Quran kind of memes and stuff about like like the Quran mentioned stars and we didn't know what stars were or something, that kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Well, I think it's one of those things where if there's something blatantly wrong in the Quran, like it says like babies come from storks or something, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, Donald, but that's not true.
uh-oh.
Um, like if it said something crazy like that, and science is just definitively disproving something there, like that's an issue at the very least with the way that that's traditionally interpreted, right?
Yeah.
Um, what I think is interesting is that there's very little of those kinds of problems with the Quran. Like it talks about embryology in a way that apparently, like I'm not an expert on this, but apparently that kind of fits the modern scientific explanation, and
Yeah.
various things like that.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of stuff that is just impossible to confirm or deny, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
just one of those things where it's like if it creates a problem, then that's something worth looking into. But if it's just a matter of like confirming that there's no issues with it, then that's fine. But I wouldn't take it further than that.
Yeah. I think that's interesting though, that this idea of religions having some like sets of beliefs, and if one of those beliefs is obviously confused, then that means that it's obviously the whole thing is wrong, and therefore you don't have to think about it as much. I think a lot of people, that's how they operate with religion, especially I know with the Catholic Church. That's like it's especially even personally for me. There's different things that I don't know, like they might say, well, if you've got this big religion or religious organization and there's abuse in it, and these people claim to be closer to God or something like that, then obviously they got to be wrong or something. There's kind of like chain of beliefs, and I mean you can kind of apply that to anything really. You could say, well, there's Islam, but obviously if there's like these issues of conflict in the Middle East or some of that, therefore they must not have things figured out or some of that. And it's kind of this interesting kind of thing of like non-contradiction or figuring things out. And I think that one of the things that's kind of like changed in my thinking, which has been hard, is that someone can be right about a lot of things and then wrong about a lot of other things. And it would be nice if you could just like have a system, like if you didn't have to use your thinking kind of thing, and kind of actually, maybe at some level that would be nice, but in reality, it's like you're forced to deal with these realities that are very, very complex and difficult to kind of sift through. Like, the religious, like theology of sexuality or something like that is something that's hard to think through without, feeling like you're being mean to someone, or because there's so many different like diverse views that it's kind of like a lot of people I think kind of shut down the conversation where it gets uncomfortable, and it's kind of like you kind of have to work through these kind of difficult things. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think people like shut it down on both sides, right? Like whether they're trying to dismiss a particular religion or just religion in general, they'll try to find something that they can say, well, that's clearly wrong, and then they don't have to ever think about it again. Yeah. And then there's people who are committed to a particular religion, and they just don't want to think about other issues, so they just say like, well, we figured this out 500 years ago, and so we don't, this is what it is. And I think in both cases, you're sort of, I don't know, it's almost like an affront to God in a way. I mean, not in a, it's a bad thing, but I'm not, that sounds a little harsh. But what I'm trying to say is I think, you are in a particular time and place with particular issues, and if it was just a matter of like picking a certain belief system and just adhering to it regardless of what actually made sense to you or not, and just being like, well, I can't trust any of my thinking, I can't trust any of my own judgment, I just have to trust these people, and that's the whole point of your existence, is just how well do you adhere to that trust. That seems really bizarre and really that just doesn't seem like the point of life to me.
Sure.
I think it's a little bit more complicated. Sometimes you have to think things out for yourself a little bit, because whatever institutionalized kind of thing that you're working with, it just doesn't have good answers. I'm not even saying wrong answers. I'm just saying they don't have good answers. Maybe they're not implemented correctly. Maybe they're not thought out for this particular context or whatever.
Yeah.
But other times, your judgment might be based on something that maybe you have imperfect information. Maybe you're being motivated by, like in an emotional way or an egoistic way or something. Your just judgment is imperfect, and so you have to navigate that. And that to me is like what faith means. It's not just I believe this and I'm not going to think about it anymore. It's more like I'm going to think about this, knowing that everyone else who's thinking about it is imperfect, including myself.
Yeah. Yep. No, I think you're right. I think that makes complete sense. Okay, I'll move on to the next one. So this is the next question. I'm really happy you're making this podcast. I enjoyed hearing you both speak sincerely. I'd love to hear more about your views or experiences on academia. I'm applying to PhDs now and just read Eagleton's Intro to Lit Theory. Hard not to have a bleak view of it all, but here I am applying. So we did talk, more about college and kind of in general, and kind of like as students in our experience as students. But I thought it'd be kind of interesting a little bit to kind of respond to this with kind of like academia as like a project and like as an actual institution, and whether or not PhDs are worthwhile. I guess it's just kind of a bit different question. Yeah. So I'm not
Okay.
sure if you had. Yeah.
Yeah, let me go ahead and start with this one.
Sure.
I also have a fairly bleak and cynical take on academia. I was really hoping that it would be a good place for me and that I would, I find like doing research and reading insane amounts of things and getting really in the weeds about certain topics to be really engaging, and I think I'm, reasonably talented at it. And people, professors and whatnot that I had seemed to kind of appreciate the work I was doing and everything and the energy that I had for it. And they were really supportive, and I have, only positive things to say about those people. But I also felt like it was sort of just had this like dead end kind of feel to it, like that you aren't really going to be doing anything novel. You're just sort of plugging into a machine and making sure the machine is working. And I don't know. I felt like as much as I really liked a lot of my professors and stuff, I sometimes felt like they were not, and it's not even a personal fault on their part, but I just felt like the situation that academia creates for them just doesn't allow a lot of creativity. Like you have
Yeah.
really predetermined options in terms of what you get to research and stuff, let alone what you have to teach. Like that, you have almost no real choice in. I mean,
Yeah.
you pick a field and then there's just certain spots that are open for whatever it is. Like if I continued on with like some kind of Middle East studies or whatever, I would just be teaching Turkish probably and I mean, that's
Yeah.
okay, but that's not what I would be wanting to do, especially for like the miserable money that you'd be getting. And
Yeah.
it just seems like a lot of stress and a lot of work
Yeah.
for like something that's pretty thankless. So I felt like I could do, I can read books on my own. People don't have to pay me to read books, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah. I think that it is one of those things where it ends up becoming it's a subculture with its own strange kind of rules, and like a lot of like different issues with like politeness and things you have to be very, very conscious of. And it ends up being like I don't know, it's stuff like you kind of have to obsess about submitting papers and getting certain types of responses, and it really does, especially now with how competitive it is for new PhDs, and like it creates that kind of business like tone, I think, in some ways, where it's like you kind of have to pitch yourself all the time to people and kind of I mean if you're trying to actually get a job and like do everything as you kind of are supposed to in theory, like you really, really have to kind of buy into their world. And I find that very strange. Like I just find it, I just at a personal level, like I find it very um, obviously there's a lot of other things you could do that are not. That's actually something I think is kind of funny about the teaching assistant kind of stuff and all that kind of, and like some of the grants and stuff you can get. Like, so if you go to, if you're doing a PhD in the United States at like a top school, or if you're doing one in Canada, and you're generally going to have everything paid for you, and you're going to have like a bit of an income and stuff, right? So through some sort of program or something, right? So um, the thing that's funny to me is that people in those programs are comparing themselves to generally other professionals, right? So they're saying, well, if I was a young doctor, I'd be making all this money or something like that. Or if I was doing all this stuff, I mean, they're kind of comparing themselves to that kind of tier.
Hmm.
To me, when I started doing when I did the TA thing, um, uh, and had my kind of like funding and stuff, um, uh, it was shocking earning that much. That was my kind of, that was my personal response because I don't
Yeah.
come from that, I mean, I have that same educational kind of background and stuff, but I don't have that same kind of expectations in life kind of thing. I mean, it didn't because of health reasons and stuff. So it's like I was getting paid $40 an hour to do tutorials a few times a week and stuff, and it was like almost ideal work to me. It was like almost, it was hard and it made me anxious and stuff in some ways, but it was otherwise it was pretty, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of other things I could do to earn $40 that would be not as fun. So it's kind of like it was almost really surprising, and that was my experience with family and friends that were not connected to academia and just had like kind of private sector jobs. Like one of my uncles, a few of them actually implied to me almost that it was almost like a scam that I was getting away with. Like that level of
Seems to be
money.
a theme with your family.
Yeah, and us, I guess, right? You can't win, so.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like I don't know. So it's kind of it really depends on your expectations and what you're kind of going with it. I mean, part of the reason why it was so I went to a bunch of things actually last year. They have like professional development seminars, and I kind of did a bunch of them to actually find out if I wanted to do this kind of stuff. Like I went to the ones about like how you put together a portfolio when you're applying for new professorships or something like that, all that kind of stuff. And I learned a lot. It was really quite interesting, but a lot of it was almost like, oh man, I'm not going to do this. It was gonna like it was
Right.
really it was
Yeah.
like it was like oh they're like oh you're probably going to spend 6 years as a before you get like a tenure track job, and I'm like no, I just wouldn't. This is not. I will just not do that. Then I don't know.
Yeah, the
So
competition for me is just so insane that you have to be happy doing it, or it's
yeah,
not worth it because you just have to work so hard to beat everybody else out to get a
yeah,
decent spot.
yeah,
And it's only kind of half there for me. So,
yeah.
uh, I was just kind of like, all right, I'm out.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny because even with writing and stuff, I kind of like at first I was like, well, maybe I'd be happy doing academic like stuff outside of academia, like kind of just writing about interesting kind of things and reading a lot. And even now, I'm kind of like, well, no, no, no. I want to learn a bit of that stuff, but I would much rather just read stuff like novels I haven't read, or like books that are kind of interesting, but not necessarily like journal articles about specific articles in depth. I'd much rather keep reading pretty widely
Hmm.
and then worry about and not worry about trying to turn it all into this kind of like high level product. Like I think I'd be happy to write stuff that was more um, introductory or kind of like like middle level kind of stuff than worry about trying to like make some grand contribution or something like that. So yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, why don't we move on to another one? And this one's a bit of a softball. Has Tom ever been to Finland? And if so, what was it like?
I used to go to Finland very often when I was young. We would go every year or every other year or thereabouts, usually like for Christmas or during the summer. And it was really nice.
Yeah.
My family lives in a rural area in Finland, so that's sort of what my impression was. I mean, we did go to like Helsinki and everything, which is a very modest sized city compared to like Chicago, for
Yeah.
example. But yeah, it was nice. Just like they they don't have a farm exactly, but my grandfather hunts, and they have a little like vegetable patch, and they live near a lake, which most people in rural Finland do.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of fishing and stuff like that, and it was just kind of like nice country life, really like relaxed and just really nice, really pleasant.
Yeah. So does Washington State have a lot of? I mean, it does have like a lot of like lakes and rural area and stuff. And did you have the same kind of experience there of like kind of like rural? Um,
It's similar, but there's differences. I couldn't quite tell you exactly what they are. It's just sort of like a vibe kind of is slightly different. Finland actually has, I think, a huge number of lakes.
Yeah.
Washington has rivers through it and mountains and stuff that Finland doesn't have. So there's a little bit of difference there. And the agriculture just seems a little bit different. Like in Washington, there was a lot of, like where we were, there was like tulip, people were growing tulips and stuff at a certain period of time. And then there was a lot of focus on, it was shifting to corn, and then they would kind of meet the market, it seemed to change year to year almost.
Yeah.
And in Finland, it was a lot more just people doing like, this guy has the cows, this guy has the chickens, and you just kind of, it seemed a lot more like casual. Now I don't know, maybe that was just my impression. I was quite young when I was in Finland, but yeah.
Did you go like camping when you were younger, or at all, or like?
Yeah, we did a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of that kind of stuff when I was younger. That was one of the things that was nice about growing up in the Great Lakes area. Is we constantly, for like a few years when I was younger, we had a motorhome and went all over the Midwest, kind of like Great Lakes area. Just so that was a big part of my kind of youth, and like going to the cottage sometimes. Like we would rent a cottage. And I don't know. Anyway, that's my kind of my vision of Scandinavia is kind of like camping kind of. That's kind of the rustic kind of small kind of houses, wooden houses or something like that. Kind of
that's pretty much it. Like my grandparents have a little summer cabin that's kind of like in the middle of nowhere, and it's got like a traditional sauna, and it was I just remember like. We would go hunting with the dogs, and then when it started to get dark, we would start up the sauna and then hop back and forth between the cold lake and the hot sauna, and it was just nice.
Yeah. That's cool.
And then camping, we did a lot of that in Italy actually, and that was cool. There was for whatever reason there was like camping grounds that Americans had access to. I think they were. Maybe part of like army grounds, like army bases or something. And it was just really nice. We did a lot of like road trips whenever we were like in different countries. It was just like, okay, let's go over here and see this and see that and stuff. So I have a lot of memories of like driving around central Anatolia and up and down Italy and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So my parents were much more, they didn't want to go overseas at all or anything like that, or go that far really a lot of the time. Like, I don't think that they went, I don't think my parents have ever been to California, you know what I mean? Like that kind of, you know what I mean? Like that direction. So anyways, growing up, it was just really the Great Lakes area that I went to and stuff. So it was kind of an extreme kind of change for me when I went to China for 4 months and stuff. So obviously, like that was kind of I don't know, like I didn't see like So anyway, we can talk about that maybe more another day. Sure. Maybe we'll just wrap up for now. I guess I'm not sure. There's not much else I wanted to bring up, so I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Yep. Bye.
Used to stash the package in the mattress or the sofa. Mama kept complaining about the marijuana odor. Had a brick of Molly when the lawman pulled me over. I was putting keys in the motor like Toyota. Used to K-roll paints, I fucked a lot of niggas over. So I bought a pipe and kept a toaster with the holster. Used to ask my brother why he cooked with baking soda. Told me I won't understand this life until I'm older. Work the work.